Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Lackawanna Pastimes. I'm Sarah Puccini, the Assistant Director of the Lackawanna Historical Society. In January, we always observe Anthracite Heritage Month to look at the history, culture, and impact of anthracite coal mining in the region. So today we're joined by Bill Conlogue. Bill is a trustee for the Historical Society and also teaches English at the University of Scranton. Bill has 3 recent books about the impacts and mostly the environmental impacts of anthracite coal mining here and there, undermined in coal country, and working watersheds. Today he's going to be talking about our common home, looking at what's underneath Scranton, specifically under the hill section. So Bill, I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Before I get started, a couple things I wanted to thank Sarah and Marianne Savakinis and Michael Knies at the University of Scranton Library for their help in gathering images for this presentation. And 2, I wanted to point to the title and explain why I named this presentation Our Common Home, Scranton and the Environment. So Our Common Home is an allusion to Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical from 2015, where he was talking about the human effect on the environment, climate change, species extinction, and his belief that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are ultimately one cry. And Scranton has a doubleness to it, talking about the city of Scranton, but also the University of Scranton, because the Catlin House and its next door neighbor, St. Thomas Hall, will be one of the focuses of the presentation. And environment, I'm specifically talking about the environment in the Scranton region, but then pointing to the larger environment, the earth. So what I'm going to do is to emphasize that Scranton has a significance in the history of the world's environment for several different reasons. One is it's part of the northern anthracite field, and the anthracite fields were the provider of the initial fuel that industrialized the United States. And if you're thinking about climate change, the United States is one of the major emitters of carbon. That is significant. And then 2, Scranton, just down the street from where I am, is involved in creating the infrastructure that spread that industrialization across the United States in making T-rails for railroad systems. And then 2, the environmental legacies that I want to point to are still hampering the development of the city. Economically, for example, in Pennsylvania, 12% of the population lives in poverty. In Scranton, 22% of the population lives in Scranton. And I think that's an echo of the deindustrialization of the region following World War II, when, by the way, the rest of the country, at least most of it, was in a boom time. This area was struggling. So I'll look at land, water, air, and fire as I go through, and I'll spend, I think, a half hour, maybe 40 minutes. If you have any questions, comments, if I've made an error, just let me know. And I'll proceed by just talking about images and leading us through different aspects of our environmental history here. This is a shot of closed hopper cars at the end of Monroe Avenue, which is where Monroe meets Ridge Row. This is only a few steps from the Catlin House, from St. Thomas Hall. This is to remind us that though fossil fuel production has basically ended in Scranton, Scranton is still part of the current production of fossil fuels, because these closed hopper cars are filled with sand that is mined out in Illinois and Wisconsin and brought here and then shipped to Carbondale, loaded in trucks, often mixed with water from the Lackawanna, and taken to natural gas drilling sites in the northern tier, Susquehanna County, Bradford County. So our fossil fuel production history is still with us, at least obliquely, because these cars are running on the infrastructure that was created for coal. The Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, their former lines. This is a drill site in, I believe it was Bradford County several years ago. But what's interesting about this photograph is the intersection of the bucolic farm in the background, and then further back, the woods. And in the middle ground is the drill site. And then the foreground is a body of water. And of course, in the initial drilling of natural gas, water was a very contentious issue, and how much contamination of groundwater there would be, and the disposal of water that came back from a well. This is a natural gas drilling site close up. Now, the larger boxes on the left and just beyond the rig, those are the diesel-powered engines that power the site. And then notice on either side of the drill pad, there are ponds for collection of the flowback. And then this was originally trucked to sewage treatment plants, but that wasn't working. And then the industry was able finally to recycle much of it. So a lot of the water that they collect goes back into the earth to frack more wells. Oh, and I should say, I'll back up, those diesel engines that run in those elongated boxes, the industry is now trying to reduce its carbon footprint because it's selling natural gas to Europe, which has laws about what carbon footprint they want imported into their nations. So there's an interesting irony there. This is Scranton in 1966. 1966 is the 100th anniversary of the creation of the city. It's also the year that the Scranton Sewer Authority was created. And then a couple of years later, there would be a sewage treatment plant come online. It's also the year that the last underground mine was operating, which is now the mine tour in McDade Park. This obviously is an aerial view of the city from south side, looking northward. So we are at the Catlin House. The Catlin House is in the front, just beyond what I think was a trucking garage in the front, near the railroad tracks. To the left is, let me see if I can do it. Oh, right here is the Scranton Estate. This is originally, at the time, the library for the university. And then there was a house, I don't know if you know this, but there was a house in the back for a long time. This is the old science center that was torn down several years ago. Before they built a new science center right here, there's a Catlin House where the Historical Society is. This is St. Thomas Hall. Here is the Crawford House. This is a house that was owned by a guy named Joseph Crawford, who was the president of the People's Coal Company that was responsible for all kinds of mine subsidence in West Side in the early 20th century. It then became the home of the Juvenile Detention Center until it was torn down in the 1980s. I want to call your attention to these dark spots in the back. Those are piles of culm. Culm is waste coal in rock. So this, I believe, is the Von Stork pile. This is over near where the Greenridge Street Bridge is, Naog Ave. There's a giant there, if you're familiar. Back here is likely the Dixon City pile. Over here, I believe, is the Marvin culm piles, and we'll come back to those. And then here, this is steam heat, so I'm assuming that this is a pile related to steam heat, which was producing heat for a bunch of downtown for a long time. In the foreground, of course, is the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad tracks. This is, at the bottom, Roaring Brook. And of course, a little bit to the left, further down, would be the iron furnaces. So we'll come back to some of these sites, and we'll be moving back and forth in time, if that's okay. This is what was, well, under the ground in much of the city. This is a mule that was underground for 28 years. And it's a reminder that mining wasn't just a human endeavor. It also involved animals, mules, of course, but then canaries, obviously, remember to test the air. And then rats were important for miners because they warned of cave-ins. So this mule was in service for 28 years. And there were stables underground for mules, and many mules simply went blind because they were walking in darkness for so long. And if they took a mule out of the ground, it was hard to get him back in. This is a shot that suggests how close and how the weight of the earth. These are men who were fixing a track in the mine, but this is all staged, of course, because there wouldn't be that much light. So the photographer brought light in. The only light that would really be there if they were actually working would be the light that is on their heads, and that would not go far. The other thing I want to point out about this shot is the mine props on the side here that would be put up to hold the ceiling in place, not to hold the surface up, but just the ceiling. Because many mine accidents were because of the fall of the ceiling. This is a petrified stump that fell from a mine ceiling in 1909. It was huge, and they found other petrified pieces of the trunk. And this is, I think, just an interesting reminder of where coal comes from. It's organic matter that fell into swamps that was compressed for eons. On the surface, this is a coal breaker. Breakers were, as the name suggests, built to break up coal. So coal would come here in big pieces with cars. They'd be brought to the top here, dumped inside the building, and then they would move through a series of rollers that would have spikes on them that would crush it. And then what was crushed would fall onto screens that would shake, and then the coal would fall through the holes and then go into another series of crushers, if need be, to size it to a particular size so that it could be sold for various types of furnaces. Now, early on, they couldn't do anything with the smallest sizes of coal. So the small pieces were just dumped on the ground in cone piles. And here's an example to the left. And then too, this is Lucky Run, ironically named, I think, in West Side, because this is the Hyde Park breaker near the Hyde Park Cemetery. If you know Luzerne Street, where West Scranton High School is, you just keep going up the hill and it would be off there to the right. The other thing about this that's interesting is the proximity of the breaker to the homes in the background, because obviously many folks would be walking to work here. And then the number of tracks that would be running through the city. This is from the early 19th century, I think it's about 1915, 1910. Then Scranton had 111,000 people, and there were, I think at least, and there were 26 square miles that made up the city, but there were 27 breakers, collieries, like this. So that's a big footprint across that city footprint. Inside the breaker would be a scene like this. Boys who are 8 to 12, 15 years old, who are using their hands and feet to separate rock from the coal before it moves down into rail cars that would take it away. Note, some of them are wearing masks, and you have the suggestion of the dust that's created here. And of course, this is backbreaking work. Note how they're sitting at an angle up, looking down. And then there are a few adults here. This guy up near this post is likely an injured miner who's still working, but can't work underground. And of course, the guy over here on the left is a supervisor, I assume. This is how the other half lived. This is the Scranton Estate. This was built in 1872, I believe it was finished. So the park-like atmosphere of the estate. This is now the admissions office for the University of Scranton. This was donated, I believe it was donated, to the Jesuits in 1941. And the Jesuits set up shop there in June of 1942, which wasn't really a great time to start a men's college when most men in the city were either working underground for the war effort or going off to fight it. And that's directly across from this present scene, which is St. Thomas Hall. This was just last September. But note how beautiful the grounds are and how green it is, especially with the weather that we're having today. But this common area here was Linden Street. This was a city street at one time before it was bricked in. And it looks pretty solid. It looks substantial, but it's all undermined, like much of the rest of the city. And I want to take you underground in a little bit of detail in the next several slides using maps, if that's okay. But before we get there, this is what was in place before St. Thomas was built, and it was dedicated in 1962. So this was an engineering building. And across the street, across Linden Street, was an arts and humanities building. This is the Catlin House where the Historical Society is. This is Monroe. These were former Navy barracks. It was surplus at the end of World War II, so the university was able to pick these up and use them for classroom space and space for administrators. This is an 1857 map of the same region. This is the estate. This is Linden. This is where the Catlin House is. This is Monroe. And note that these blocks here are all laid out for sale, but they're not numbered, as some of these other blocks are. And in Southside, there are numbered blocks. These are the addresses, but they're occupied with buildings, newly constructed. So this is only 17 years after the iron furnaces, the origin of the city, became operative. What is, all this is, of course, on a grid system, as you notice. And then natural space, Roaring Brook, is running against that grid, which I find interesting. But here is a dam that was holding Roaring Brook back, creating this pond. The water from the pond was used to power generators or steam engines at the iron furnaces and in the rolling mill, which was back here at the bottom of the screen. Now, later, of course, you'll see how this fills in. Oh, and I'll remind you here of the tracks of the Delaware, Lackawanna Western Railroad. If you were going down the tracks on the screen, you'd be going to New York. If you were going up, you'd be going to New York State. This is a close-up. If you get lost in the maps that I show, remember this little jog right here in Linden. So this is Linden over Monroe, and then there's that turn and comes up. A couple of interesting things about this map that is suggestive of what's going on underground is over here is a note of a cave. So there was a mine cave here. And there was this is in 1960, I believe. When they were building the present library, there was another cave right here, or in this general area. This is that Crawford House that I pointed out. This is now where I'm sitting, the Center for Literary and Performing Arts. If you're familiar with the campus, there's a green right here, right now, at the corner of Linden and Monroe. There used to be a gas station. Ironically, it was an Exxon station. These circles here with the lines, those are to tell us what the elevation is above sea level. So we're about 785 feet above sea level here. And you're using those designations, of course, to have access, at least visually, to what's happening underneath the surface. I don't know if you know this, but there's a bolt on the courthouse downtown on the, I think it's this western tower at the bottom that has an official above sea level designation. I think it's 750 feet. But I want to call your attention to these spots right here. This is where boreholes were drilled so that men could go beneath the surface to access what was going on before they built St. Thomas. So let me show you this. This is what's beneath the surface. This is 2 layers of coal down. So if you think about the coal measures as a layer cake, and then there are sticks that are separating them, these would be the coal pillars. The layers would have to be, the pillars would have to be aligned with each other so that the surface would not fall. If you're not familiar with what one of these maps looks like, these rectangular pieces, those are solid pieces of coal that hold up the surface. All that open between them and among them, that's where the coal has been mined out. This, which looks like a road, is a road that a gangway that takes the coal to the surface somewhere up here. And then, of course, is bringing air in and circulating air around what are to the face, to the rooms where miners are working. This is the estate where the Scranton house is. Remember, this is Roaring Brook over here, so it was also undermined. And then here's a wider view of the same spot. So there's that gangway. It goes all the way up here. And then there are smaller gangways that move the coal around. This is a space where the coal was purchased. So there was no mining in this space. And it's important, I should have said before, that coal companies separated surface rights from subsurface rights. So they would sell you the surface, but they would keep the ground beneath so they could mine the coal. And when they sold it to you initially, you had no legal recourse if the mining destroyed your property. And if you have a home in Scranton, you have a deed that expressly says that it's called the cutthroat waiver, that the mine company has no legal obligation to recompense you for your lost property. This right here, see this big piece, this big pillar? Remember that. This is where the Catlin House and St. Thomas Hall is. We'll come back to that in a second. And then here's the courthouse down here, just to give you a sense of where we are in the city. Again, the same spot, but turned around. And here's St. Thomas Hall. This is that coal pillar. I suggest you remember the Catlin House would be right there. This series of dots here between these squares is suggestive of this area being filled in to support the surface. And this is officially Dunmore number 1. This is the problem. This is the first layer down. This is the Clark vein. So this was mined out. The previous mining was done probably in the early 20th century, maybe into the 1930s. This was done in the 1840s and 50s. So if you can see this, there's a lot of space between those squares. And the squares, remember, are solid pieces of coal. So this is that huge open space on the first vein that, remember I asked you to watch for that big piece? That was supposed to cover that and hold it up. So when people went down through those boreholes to look at what was going on under the surface, there's an example of a drilling rig, but here's a guy going down. This is what they found. They were surprised at what they discovered because this had not been on many of the maps that they were working with. And they were quoted in the paper as saying that they were horrified by what they discovered because the area was huge. And this guy isn't anxious to go any deeper. And note how much space is just wide open there. They came to the surface and said you could play baseball down there. Note, of course, the floor. All of this is slate that has fallen from the ceiling. If you look at the top of these tree trunks, the ceiling used to be that low, but it's fallen. There it is, up to that point, so a foot or so. So that's a lot of the ceiling dropping. So that suggested to them that the surface was unstable, not just under the site where St. Thomas is, but this was throughout the lower hill section. So that instituted a flushing project, an effort to fill all of that space with waste coal. Here's an example of a pillar that's coming apart. Now, what the University of Scranton did was they filled that whole area underneath the present St. Thomas with 18,000 cubic feet of concrete. And then they put a regular foundation, as they're laying the footer here, to build the building. So this back here was the student center. Of course, there were houses still up further on Linden Street when this was constructed and dedicated in 1962. And there's the completed building after its dedication. Now, not all those spaces were filled with concrete on the rest of campus or the rest of the lower hill section. They were filled with this. This is the Marvin Colliery from the air, probably in the 1930s. This is the breaker in the center of the shot. This is the mine entrance across the river. This is the conveyor that brought the coal to the breaker. And then here's another conveyor taking waste coal to this pile here. So there's a huge pile to the right, and then there's a huge pile in the foreground. Again, this is the river. Of course, when it rained, a lot of that stuff was going into the river. This area right here, if you see the street that is running across the top of the shot, that's near where 81 is today. So 81 cuts straight across here. This is true. There's another cone pile up here. The Pancoast mine was in this region. And then, of course, Dixon City is back in there. So what they did was they trucked all that to downtown. This is the Von Storck Colliery. Remember I mentioned that when I was talking about that aerial shot of the city? This is near the Greenridge Plaza, near the Greenridge Street Bridge, Naog Avenue, the Giant. The colliery was across the river. The cone pile was opposite. This is that area today. So there's Giant. Planet Fitness is in here. This is all parking. There's the bank. There's a dollar, or the bank's here. There's a dollar store. All of this area right here was a cone pile. So it's huge. This is the cone pile. Now I'm using this just as an illustration of what they likely did at the Marvin Colliery to bring that cone to the University of Scranton campus and shove it underground there in the lower hill section. So they would load up the comb into crushers. They would take what had been already crushed several times, and then they'd crush it again to make it finer. And then they'd pile it up again, and then they would load it into trucks, mix it with water, and then shoot it through a pipe like this underground, and then wait for it to fill up. And then the water would drain away, and then you'd be left with the comb. And again, these are mine props that are, remember, holding up the ceiling. These are pillars of coal that are holding up the surface on either side. Now, the Von Storck pile, it took 30 years to build that pile. It took 5 years to erase it. And much of that comb went under the city at the upper end of Lackawanna Avenue, you know, where the bus station is. So this is what it looks like when the water is drained away. Now, there'd still be space underground because you couldn't really fill it all the way to the ceiling. But if there's a collapse of the surface, space like that would not do a whole lot of damage. This is what they wanted to avoid. Streets opening up, houses collapsing, utilities destroyed, water, sewer, gas, electric. There were houses that blew up because gas lines were ruptured. The gas accumulated in the house. Somebody lit a match and then boom. Other places people were overcome. This could happen to your house. These are all photographs in the early 20th century. This is likely in West Side. Even if you were dead, you might not escape a mine subsidence. So this is in Cathedral Cemetery. So these young boys posing for the camera, looking at the dead. I'm told there's a hand that you could see, the prominent woman from Scranton who was buried here. Now I'm moving to water. So this is an artist rendering of Lily Pond. And you see Lily spelled a couple different ways with 3 L's or 2. This is where Courthouse Square is today. So the area around Courthouse Square was for a long time soggy. Even after the courthouse was built, they were still dealing with water issues. This is a map from 1877. Note, this is 20 years after that 1857 map I showed, and these squares are filling in with homes. So the city is expanding, but not here, because it's all swamp. So to fill in that area so that they could build on it, this is in the heart of the city, they brought a lot of the waste from the iron mills through, note this, there's a tunnel that goes under the tracks, under Monroe, under the estate, comes out, if you're familiar with the greenhouse on campus, there at Linden Street, and then the tracks continue down Linden across Bank Street to where Elm Park Church is. So presumably they piled a lot of the iron waste there and then either extended the tracks down to the area where the courthouse is, or they took it in wagons or whatever. But Sarah has pointed out that the wall, if you're familiar, again, with the estate, the wall that surrounds the estate on Bank Street, up Linden, used to go across Monroe and around. That was built in 1877, likely, right after the riot downtown in 1877, where the mayor was beaten and 4 striking miners were shot, killed, to protect the estate. So that wall is not built of stone, I'm told. It's built of iron. So I'm assuming that they extended this track later to fill in after they built the wall. And here again is where St. Thomas would be, and then the Callan House. This is what the area where the iron furnaces looked like in 1840 when the Scrantons first came to town to raise the iron furnaces. This was Slocum's Hollow. There was a grist mill there, the undershot water wheels. People would bring their grain here to be ground. This is the embankment where the iron furnaces were built. This is Roaring Brook, and of course they have a wall here. This is the same spot on the right. This is on the left, that's elsewhere, but on the right is where the iron furnaces were. This is in the late 19th century. You can see one of the entrances to furnaces in the back. All of that area, if you're familiar with the iron furnaces, was covered. So they bring the iron out, molten iron, and then they would have the pig iron, and they would take it to the rolling mill to roll it into whatever they were making. Here's Roaring Brook, which was likely polluted at that point. And then on top of the ruins of the iron furnaces, that also was enclosed. So several steam engines running here. There were several outbuildings that were making machinery and making other things to support the workings. This is beneath those sheltered spaces at the base of the iron furnaces. These are the workers. This would be a very hot job because you'd have to open the iron. It would be all molten and then run it out so that you could create the pig iron that you needed. In 1902, that entire area was dismantled and then it was all shipped to Buffalo. And if you're familiar with Buffalo, there's a town a little bit south of the main city called Lackawanna. That's where they set up shop. And Bethlehem Steel ran that site until the 1980s. And today it's a New York State Superfund site. So they're trying to clean that up. But this was abandoned for decades. There's Roaring Brook, again, probably polluted. There's that wall. This whole space that was covered, note the steel posts that suggest they were holding up a roof. This is the iron furnace area cleaned up by the state to make it a tourist attraction in the late 1960s. It's still an impressive site, even without the enclosures. There's the Radisson Hotel. Back here would be the Long Center, the University of Scranton. The estate just over here, and then the Catlin House and St. Thomas would be just beyond that hill. This is the number 7 dam on Roaring Brook. In 1870, oh, let me back up. The city was getting its water from the Lackawanna River for quite a while. But in 1866, when the city was formed, they declared the Lackawanna River unfit for human consumption. So they were then supplying the city from the dam at Roaring Brook. But then that got polluted because they were mining further upstream. And in 1870, the water from that pond at the iron furnaces dam ended up corroding steam engines at the iron furnaces so much that they exploded and 11 men were killed. So they had to find cleaner water. So they built dams further upstream. This is the first one they built further upstream, I believe, the number 7 dam in Dunmore. This is a dam a year ago that had the problem. They were fixing the dam, and then there was a sediment release, and that killed a lot of microinvertebrates in the stream bed. And then the sediment went all the way down to Lackawanna. This is the Lackawanna River below the Old Forge borehole. This is rust. The last 3 miles of the Lackawanna River is pretty dead. Not much lives there. Fish are coming back, but they're covered with the scales of the rust. 100 million or 100,000 tons of metals come out of the earth at this borehole every day. So above the borehole it's pretty clean these days. Below it, it's polluted. Now, the borehole is draining the mines from Archibald all the way down to Old Forge. Otherwise, the water would back up into people's basements and then spew out into the street. So this is sort of a safety valve. And it was drilled in 1962. This is an aerial shot of the confluence of the Lackawanna River, that's the orange line, and the Susquehanna River. So that this is the pollution from the air. And this, of course, runs all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay. So the Lackawanna River is still the top, or one of the top point sources of pollution of the Chesapeake Bay. This is the famous 1855 Innes painting, Lackawanna Valley. And art historians will see this painting as an effort to harmonize industry and nature. So the natural world enveloping the industrial sites of the roundhouse for the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. This, of course, is Lackawanna Avenue. This is probably smoke from the rolling mills here from the iron furnaces. This is a coal train that's going towards New York State. And then, of course, the engine is running on wood, ironically. But the pollution is suggested in the streams of smoke. And of course, we're in the same position as the viewer who is at the base of this tree, which is dominant in the foreground. Now, a couple of ominous things about this, of course, is all these stumps in the front that suggest the removal of the natural world. So this painting was done in 1854, 1855. It was commissioned by the railroad to promote the company. This is a photograph from the same time, taken from about the same spot. This is where that train would have been coming across the Lackawanna River. It's back here is Lackawanna Avenue. The roundhouse is over here. Now, this suggests, of course, that the painter was offering us a really imagined look at this site because he's erased all these homes in the front, made the town much smaller, and then he's populated a lot of this with trees that weren't there in 1855. This is an effort to bring past and future together. So the Ennis painting is below and to the right, and then this is a photograph of the city today. So it gives you a sense of where we are in the world in relationship to the past. And I'll just say one more thing and then just stop, I guess. These are comb banks on fire in the 1950s, 1960s. This is the Baker Bank fire that was threatening downtown. This is the other side of the river from where the south side baseball fields are. So this sulfur smell would be hovering over downtown. And the same thing was happening at the other end of the city at the Marvin site. Those comb piles were on fire in the 1950s and 60s. And you have in the foreground here drag lines that are pulling the burning comb and then dumping it into water pits to put the fire out. Now at the Baker Bank, they tried to use dynamite to blow open the comb so they could put the fire out, but that didn't work too well. So now they're trying the drag lines. And then here is Interstate 81. Anyway, so I'll mention one thing and then just stop. In 1968 or 9, the head of I believe he was the head of the Bureau of Mines, and he was appointed by Bill Scranton, the governor. His name was Charnberry. He announced that the city of Scranton was so undermined that it should be abandoned, that we should just give up and leave. And that's not something, of course, the Chamber of Commerce probably wanted to hear, but it suggests the extent of the problem and how much it would have cost, well, he thought, to actually put the city to rights. And remember, the coal companies didn't care. They just walked away when they ended mining. And the city, the county, the state was left to pick up the pieces and try to move forward. So, anyway, it's been 40 minutes or 45, so I don't want to stress your patience.
That's great,
Thanks.
Bill. This was really great information. The mind maps themselves are incredible. It really gives you a sense of the description that I think it's from the 1920s from the Mine Subsidence Acts, talking about Scranton as a city built on toothpicks. And from
Yeah.
those mind maps, you really can see. But one question I had for you, yeah, the comb dumps were flushed back into the mines in the 1960s and 70s for mine flushing programs. Is there anybody paying attention to how much this subsidence or the settlement, the fill has settled since? Is anybody aware of the holes are getting bigger or not?
Well, I think anytime anybody builds a big building, they're testing the underground.
Okay.
And they're likely doing that again with boreholes. And that's as far as I know. I don't know how carefully anybody is keeping track of what's happening underground, though the state is, because they're a repository of maps. And I'm assuming that there are some mine surveyors around.
Thanks again, Bill, for joining us, for sharing all that information. As I said, those mind maps are some of my favorite things. It's great to look at the continuing history of coal mining rather than something that happened 100 years ago that your grandfather did. We don't always consider how it still affects and impacts our lives in the Lackawanna Valley today. We do have another program coming up for Anthracite Heritage Month in person at the Catlin House on February 22nd. We'll be joined by Charlie Compass talking about Breaker Boys. And then our next virtual Lackawanna Pastimes episode, the end of February, I'll be joined by LHS volunteer George Polish, who'll be talking about Carpatho-Rusyn immigrants in the northeastern Pennsylvania, and specifically their contributions to sports. So something more lighthearted than mine subsidence and mine fires. So that'll be our February program coming up. Otherwise, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Stay warm, stay well, have a good weekend.